Guys, before today's video gets started, I just want to tell everyone thank you for all the recent subscriptions, and I appreciate it, and I hope that we can continue this trend in upward motion. I also want to remind everyone that once the channel reaches 5,000 subscribers, I'm going to do a gift certificate or gift card to Jason Waters Tuning. Jason offers tuning services, parts, anything you can imagine that's performance-wise Honda related. If you come to watch this video, make sure you hit the subscribe button, and once I get to 5,000 subscribers, I'm going to come up with some kind of little giveaway contest so that we'll pick a winner for the gift certificate. So thanks for tuning in. Let's get back to this video. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So today I'm going to show you how you can take the stock Civic brakes off of your EG Civic and you can install some DC2 GSR Integra spindles onto your EG. Alright, so the first thing you want to do is get the car off the ground, and we got to take off the wheel. This one has aftermarket lug nuts that use a key, so I use a key. Alright, so then what we're going to do is got to take loose this upper ball joint here. It's a 17mm nut. It has a little cotter pin in there, so we have to take the cotter pin out. After we do that, then we have to, since we already have the axle out, we don't have to worry about removing the axle nut. But we also have another castle nut here on the tie rod end. It's also a 17mm. And then we'll have to take off the brake line here because the Integra brake line is different than the Civic brake line. So we'll just leave the brake line connected to the spindle because we're going to replace the whole spindle. And then we've got two 12mm bolts here that hold the brake line to the shock. And then last but not least, we also have a 17mm castle nut here on the bottom. It would also have a cotter pin in it. This one's still left out from where I removed the axles originally. Yeah, so I take this one off, and that one off, and this one off. And if you had an axle in it, you take the axle out. And then the brake line, and we can take the spindle off. Alright, so I don't like to take the nuts all the way off because I use a 2-pound hammer and hit the side of the spindle to get this free, and I don't want to hit the threads, so I just leave the nut on there barely, because if you miss and hit the nut, it's not going to mess up the threads, but if you miss and hit the threads directly, it'll mess them up. I'm just hitting right here, and you can see how it pops right up. Then we hit right here on the side of the spindle and free this tie rod in. Alright, then we hit the lower control arm to get this ball joint out. And also push up on it, comes right off. Alright, then take this brake line off the shock. Two 12mm bolts. Alright, and then on the brake line, I'm just going to spray the nut up top to try to get it out. Alright, and I have a 10mm line wrench. These work really good to keep from stripping out the head of your bolt or the head of your fitting here. Alright, and on these, they like to get a lot of dirt on them. So you can see I'm just working it back and forth to kind of free it up. Sometimes I'll take my air blower and blow it off just to get that debris out so that you don't get any debris in the brake lines and that kind of stuff. Alright, now just take a pair of pliers and pull a little keeper off the top. Alright, so it's just a little keeper like this. Kind of like this little C-clip kind of. Alright, it should allow the line to come out of the holder over here. All right, so now to finish taking the spindle off, take the 17 millimeter at top, and the 17 millimeter at the bottom. Lift this off. All right, so if you've been keeping up with the series, you know that we're also putting on some coilovers and an upper control arm that's adjustable. So this is a prime opportunity to do those upgrades. So I'm gonna go ahead and do them. You can do these without taking the spindle completely off. You just have to take the 17 off up here, and you know, take this off the spindle, and take your brake lines off of your shock, and then you'll be ready to go. You can use the forks off of the Integra on the bottom. So actually, this whole complete section here is coming off, and these that came off of an Integra are going on. So, all right, so to begin with taking the coilover off, there's a 14 millimeter nut here on the back. It's just easy if you go ahead and take that off. See there, that's the bolt on the back. Basically separates the fork from the shock. 17 millimeter bolt that goes through the bottom of the fork here. This one was already loose, so I have a 17 millimeter nut, 17 millimeter head on the bolt. And the fork comes off, and now it becomes easier to work with. Now if the axle was still in there, you can still take the fork off. It makes it a lot easier than trying to deal with the complete shock. So now what we're going to do is let the car down and take the top nuts off of the shock and the control arm. All right, so these two nuts right here hold the shock on. Don't ever take the one out of the middle. It does have pressure on it, so don't take the one out of the middle, so you might run the risk of getting hurt. Only take out these two. They're 14 millimeter, and then for the upper control arm, it's just 17 millimeter, and there's another 17 millimeter nut right here. So those are the two we need to take out to get the upper control arm out, and these are the two to get the shock out. All right, so I'll go ahead and take out the shock first. I'll just stick my hand up into the fender well and hold the shock. All right, so then reinstalling the shock, we just put it back up through there, and then put our 14 millimeter nuts back on it. Once we get those started, just tighten those back down. And I'll go ahead and take off the two 17s to hold the upper control arm. All right, and I just all right, these right here actually are easier to do with the shock out of it. All right, and then also on these upper control arms, they are side specific. Has that little L for left. You can tell this kit was used. They cut the bar out. Don't really need that bar. That does make installation easier. So not have it on there. So, and then on these, you see the ball joint can be moved back and forth. So that's how they're adjustable. So we'll put that back in there. All right, so while we're here, go ahead and install our axle. Get it started onto the half shaft. And just use the plane of the axle to bump it up on there. That's all you gotta do. And then we'll put the lower control arm up on it, bolt through it, and tighten the bolt down. I kind of hate that I'm doing this all at the same time and not breaking it down further for you guys, but this is what it is without having to go through everything 10 different times. So always push up on the lower control arm to close the gap on the shock, just to make sure that the fork is always butted up to the shock before I tighten the 14 millimeter on that. All right, so here we have the Integra spindle. I just took it off the Integra. Same process taking it off the Integra as it was to take it off the Civic. So I just put in a new ball joint because the ball joints on the Integra didn't look the best. This brand here is a Beck Arnley, but you can see right there, see the 3.5? That's like OEM. 3.5 also makes the OEM ball joints, so really good brand. If you if you're in the market for some lower ball joints, I would definitely recommend the Beck Arnley. They're really nice. So I got that in there, and then now I'm gonna go ahead and get this on the Civic over here. Installing the Integra spindle is the same as taking it off the Civic spindle. They're virtually the same. The Integra one is just has a bigger brake, and just the brake itself won't go on to the DX spindle. So if you had an EX or a SI, there's really no need in doing this upgrade because they're the same size brakes. Got our Integra spindle. The axle stubbed up into it. The lower ball joint will hold it up once you put it into a lower control arm. Put in the upper, and then put in the tie rod. I always recommend putting in new cotter pins. So I got an abundance of cotter pins, so I'll put in some fresh ones, and we'll be good to go. To tighten those, this is 17 back here, and 17 on the lower. It's the same axle nut that was on the Integra or the Civic. They're both 32 millimeter. Piece of cake. The brake line, I'll route it just like it was before, and then right over to the hard line. Put our clip on our brake line just to hold it in place. Clip in until it's seated. Tighten up the 3/17s until our cotter pin holes line up. Tighten up the axle nut with 32 millimeter. Use a chisel and stake the nut into the groove on the axle. And then we'll get my cotter pins for up here, or for the up control arm, the tie rod end, and the lower control arm, or the lower ball joint. And this is done besides bleeding the brakes. So pretty straightforward, pretty simple. You can do this right at home in your garage with a few tools. So I guess that's pretty much gonna wrap up the front. All you gotta do is go find you a donor Integra in the junkyard, because the brakes are the same on the Integra, whether it's GSR, LS, whatever. And you'll be good to go. So hopefully this helps you out and gets your car stopping better than it was before. Make sure you check out the rest of the videos on the series. Got a whole video series on installing a GSR engine into this car. And I'll be doing another video on doing the rear setup. So doing the coilovers, camber kit, and the rear disc. So I just put the car on the ground, and man, she's too low right now. I gotta raise it back up just a tad. So yeah, the good thing about coilovers is they're adjustable, you know. So I guess I'll get to adjusting that tomorrow, probably when I start working on the rear. You can see the rear is still factory height. But yeah, so glad to be getting close with this car there, man. It's this kind of stuff's a labor of love, you know what I mean? Like, be good to see it gone, but it's nice to see it come together.